Oh yeah. Here we go.
When I was a kid, I never thought I'd have the chance to call the Paper Mario series controversial. Yet here we are. For the sake of succinctness and to prevent this video from becoming dated in a few years, I won't speak too much on this drama. Just know that I grew up playing the Thousand Year Door and that it's one of my favorite games. A status that, admittedly, is at least partially connected to nostalgia. While the current debate surrounding the last three Paper Mario games, Sticker Star for 3DS, Color Splash for Wii U, and now Origami King for Switch, are mainly to do with comparing them to the original two, being Paper Mario for the 64 and TTYD for GameCube, I'd like to avoid that as much as possible in this review. Regardless, I find that Origami King's, and hence its two predecessors, main problems stem from their nonsensical refusal to adhere to the basic necessities of an RPG, rather than just their ignorance of the original games themselves. But more on that later. For now, I'd like to point out some of the ways that Origami King emulates and even improves upon the overworld mechanics of its two predecessors. All three of them lean hard into the papercraft aesthetic. The fanbase is split on this decision from what I've seen, but I've found that the impressively detailed environments keep me exploring and excited to visit new locales. Other than experiencing the game's rich settings, there's a few reasons to explore. Coins are chief among them, and the sticker/cards from Sticker Star and Color Splash, respectively, are another. I'll be getting more into those in a bit, believe me. Origami King adds two new collectibles in the form of folded toads, only obtainable once the player solves some sort of puzzle or scours the environment thoroughly, and little treasures. Both of these mainly exist to collect for collection's sake, but the toads actually can give you hints in combat, and I found myself using them relatively often. Exploration is the heart of the overworld in these games, I feel, and Origami King takes strides to improve it. These moments are where the games shine, which inherently contrasts with the more dirty parts of the last three Paper Marios. Those parts surrounding what has proved polarizing for fans of the series, the combat. I'll start by briefly laying out the combat systems present in the last two entries and what my problems were with them. The battle mechanics found in Sticker Star and Color Splash are bad, bordering on terrible. They injected this loose sort of inventory management mechanic into their battles, with the stickers and cards, where various attacks are represented by a disposable item that's collected in the overworld or purchased. This mechanic was often annoying and always completely pointless. Don't forget, these games have no experience points, meaning that the player can manage their resources all they want, but there's very few times where they have to. These items are consumable, so not only is there no incentive to do combat because you gain nothing, but it's actually a wiser move to completely ignore enemies to conserve your arsenal. Equally as mind-boggling, the player does actually improve their strength and HP as they progress, but they do so by simply beating the boss of an area, rather than just fighting enemies and choosing which stats to upgrade. You might be thinking that if the player was forced to fight enemies, they'd inherently be forced to manage resources in order to make it through the game. But running from combat goes completely unpunished. Summed up, in Sticker Star and Color Splash, it is actually more advantageous to not only avoid enemies, but to run away whenever you make the mistake of initiating battle. Then when the player is forced to fight a boss, they're only required to use their expansive resources half of the time. The other half of the boss's health is destroyed in one hit by a special thing, sticker/card, found in the overworld, which has something to do with the boss's inherent weakness. The problem with these puzzles, other than the further uselessness of the player's arsenal, is that the thing required isn't always obvious, meaning that this mechanic quickly turns into a guessing game mixed with exhausting backtracking mixed with trial and error. Now, Origami King does a lot to counteract this asinine combat system. Fighting in the previous two games was like solving a puzzle without a clear answer. Fighting in Origami King is a puzzle, and I enjoy doing it. The ring-based combat, I saw someone online call it turn-based, which made me lol, works on a lot of levels. First and foremost, Mario has two attacks by default, hammer and jump, which aren't consumable. At first. Both of these interact with enemies in different ways, spatially. Jumping lets the player kill 4 enemies in a straight line, hammering lets the player kill 4 that are in a square. These combined with the rotating and sliding mechanics add a layer of depth that I hadn't expected. I won't act like the combat is the most challenging thing in the world, but I found myself asking for the Toad's help every now and then. The boss fights are similarly improved. In the previous two, boss fights were as indefensively boneheaded as regular combat. In Origami King, bosses are a sometimes clever, always self-contained challenge. The player needs to rotate the stage in order to move Mario in a certain way. They can choose to focus on a special move, aiming for this on switch then landing on a special spot, Or maybe they'll focus on dealing as much damage as possible with the average attacks. These were actually pretty hard to get the hang of at first, but slowly they became more satisfying to beat. What worried me the most when going into this game was the lack of XP. I voiced how frustratingly pointless combat is in Sticker Splash, and I was very nervous when they announced there wouldn't be any sort of traditional rewards for battling an Origami King, but the game has found at least something resembling an adequate replacement for experience. Sort of similar to the paint and color splash, Origami King gives the player confetti after defeating an enemy. The confetti is used to repair holes that are either optional or preventing the player's progress. The other reward is coins. These games are all about economy. The more confetti or coins given to the player, and the less they're used in the overworld, the less reason there is to search for these rewards. Color Splash's problem, along with its plethora of other issues, is that paint is absolutely everywhere in the overworld. Thus, there's no need to battle for it. At first, Origami King's economy didn't seem much better, but the further I progressed, the better the economy got. The holes that needed to be covered up got bigger, while enemies and environments gave me less confetti. Because of this, there's, believe it or not, a reason to battle. Enemies give you far more confetti than can be found in trees or bushes or the like, making them a sort of bank for resources. Coins also have more of a purpose than before. They can be used to buy little accessories that mix up Mario's abilities, sort of like a dumbed down version of the badges in the original two games. And these can actually be pretty pricey. By far the most useful component of coins, though, is actually seen in combat. The most challenging aspect of battling is the time limit. The times that I felt rushed by the surprisingly strict clock weren't rare. Coins can be used to purchase more time, meaning that the more coins you earn can actually decide the game's difficulty. The reward system as a whole is noticeably more tightly designed than in Sticker Splash, and I'm happy to see the development team giving some forethought here. These tweaks go a long way. But not long enough. While Origami King's combat and exploration are undoubtedly better than its predecessors, the modern Paper Mario formula still holds it back from being anything more than average, in my opinion. I really want to say that this is an adequate final step in the struggle we've had with the Paper Mario series, but I just can't. Firstly, even though I've spoken highly of the overworld in all three games, there is one problem that each share. As seems promised with any game that has a partner character, Origami King held my hands so tight that I was desperate to get away at times. Exploring does have its range of satisfactions, but it's difficult to enjoy the sprawling levels when I'm stopped so often. These breaks can be filled with some engaging dialogue, but their oppressive quantity can kill the pacing. Now, this may have been forgivable in this kind of game, i.e. a kid's game, but the Origami King's aggressive coddling is at odds with its sometimes brutal combat scenarios. I'm all for a challenge, but some of the bosses can be surprisingly abstract. While not as bad as Sticker Splash's nonsensical thing Puzzles, Origami King's bosses still require a certain order of special abilities to defeat. These battles are completely self-contained at least, but rarely are the answers clear enough to figure out with the knowledge provided during the game. Rather than giving the player natural hints or making the boss actually telegraph their weaknesses, the game just gives them the answers through these little letters that are on the playing field. Olivia pops in constantly in the overworld to twist the player's head in the right direction, but can be completely useless while in battle. Of all things, I don't think the boss fights should be exempt from the game's incessant nagging. Problems aren't just kept to the bosses though. For some inexplicable reason, Intelligent Systems has stuck to the idea of consumable combat resources, this time in the form of equipment. These aren't nearly as asinine as the cards and stickers, granted, but their existence is utterly without reason. So, Mario's base jump and hammer moves are unlimited, a major improvement on Sticker Splash. But the further the player gets in the game, the stronger abilities needed. This is where the equipment comes in. It has 3 levels, shiny, flashy, and legendary. Each costs more than the last, and each will break after repeated uses. The player will always have enough money to purchase spare equipment, so essentially their only purpose is to force them to backtrack to Toad Town in order to buy more, then make their way back to wherever they were when the equipment broke. Eventually, I was buying loads of equipment at once so I wouldn't have to backtrack. The concept isn't inherently bad, it's just such a blatantly obvious attempt at staying away from experience points. Instead of allowing the player to use XP to upgrade the strength of their various moves, or hell, even just letting them funnel coins into some sort of bank, which would eventually lead to, say, permanent upgrades, Origami King forces you to purchase equipment over and over. The mechanic is neither bad nor good, it's just nothing. Similar to the stickers and cards, the equipment is only here in a failed attempt at mimicking the progression flows of standard RPGs. But what surprised me most about Origami King was that the combat wasn't actually its biggest issue. Rather, it was something that went untouched from the previous games. I realize that this complaint is a common one, but for some undoubtedly irrational reason, each and every NPC is either a generic Toad or a standard Mario enemy. The writers have worked hard to give each character as much individual character as possible. The writing teeters the edge between great and brilliant most of the time, but it just isn't enough. Bowser's minions take a more prevalent role this time around, just as Bowser does himself, and that helps with variety, but even still the most we get is a Bob-omb with a nickname and a Toad with a hat. Later in the story, there's a character that's revealed as responsible for everything that's happened, in a way. There's this dramatic lead up to meeting him, and guess what? It's just a Toad. Not a wise Toad with an arched back and a long white beard. A Toad. A Toad the exact same as every other Toad. But hey, at least this one has overalls. This might sound like a nitpick, but variety in the characters' designs would have given the game so much identity. As is, it feels like Color Splash 2 more than anything. I hardly remember most of the interactions because they were with the same face that I'd seen in a million other places. Instead of talking to a character specific to a region and wise to its customs and secrets, it's Toad number 84. In fact, this Toad may as well be the same exact Toad I've talked to 84 other times. I mean, have you ever seen Toad and Toad with hat in the same room? I didn't think so. I wouldn't go as far as to call this decision lazy, but it's safe to a disgusting degree. It's just so sanitized that even the most unique elements and locations of the game end up feeling generic. I think when the most unique characters in your game are gigantic talking office supplies, it's time to rethink your choices. With Origami King, we get yet another stubborn attempt at making this formula work. It may work better than the previous two, but that's hardly saying much. What we get is a game so scared by its own reflection that it contradicts itself into oblivion. On one hand, we've got a character pulling you along by the nose, and in the other, the game leaves you toiling and failing against a boss. We've got Toads literally copy-pasted all over the place, and then we're presented with a combat system nearly incomparable to any other. We've clearly got nonsensically restrictive direction, and then the team taking risks that didn't move past the stage of experimentation. No, I don't think it's impossible to create new designs for old Mario characters. No, I don't think genderless and ageless Toads make the game more approachable. And no, Origami King isn't a step in the right direction. It has no direction. It's aimless. A few especially polished spots aren't enough to clean that mirror. If I went back in time and told my 7-year-old self what the 6th entry of his favorite series was like, it'd break his heart. But I'd also tell him that it's not worth his time, just like it wouldn't be 16 years later.